If you're an early stage founder and you are at like sub 5 million in revenue, you shouldn't be hiring somebody out of Oracle or Google. You can do that, but they're not going to necessarily have the tools to be able to build what you need from scratch. And so you're looking for people who have seen success at that stage. It's so important to have the right people that have the capability to build that company. And you really have such a short window of time to get those hires right. You should be doing due diligence on the company as much as they're doing due diligence on you. And I always tell candidates, like, think about 2 jobs from now, right? What are you trying to do 2 jobs from now? And is this next step going to get you closer to that? Or is it going to take you in a different direction?
Well, welcome to the Red Chair. Today we have Sonia Shah. Sonia, welcome from Faraday Partners. What are you doing here? You're in Lisbon. What happened? How did you get here?
It's a good question. I moved here last year from New York. Honestly, I've always wanted to live in Southern Europe. It's kind of been a goal of mine.
Interesting.
I actually almost went to business school in Spain like 15 years ago, and over the years tried to figure out a way to kind of make it work. And the stars sort of just aligned for me last year with like work, was comfortable with me moving, and just timing felt like the right time. And I had some friends here in the Lisbon area, so I made the move.
Amazing. So, and tell me, where did it all start? Where did you study? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I'm from Los Angeles, California, originally. Went to school, undergrad in San Diego, California. Was working in financial services until the market crashed. Used that as a reason to go to business school. So I went to University of Michigan to get my MBA.
Okay.
And then from there, I went into management consulting at PwC. Was doing...
In California?
In New York, actually.
New York.
Yeah. I was doing human capital consulting, so kind of in the people and talent focus, and sort of ended up in executive search as one does. And that was about 10 years ago, and I've been doing it ever since.
Okay. And so how did this lead to sort of talent acquisition in startups and working with VCs?
Yeah. So when I was in consulting, I was working in financial services, and it was very inclusive, like very focused on regulatory compliance, and it was sort of not focused on innovation or technology. And I had friends that I went to school with that were talking about what was going on in the tech industry, and I felt very much like it was passing me by. And so I kind of made a decision that I wanted to make the transition into technology, leverage my consulting background, work for like a smaller company. And I found like an executive search firm that was looking for management consultants to come do executive recruiting. And actually, they're structured very similarly in terms of like their project base. It's all about client relationships. And so it was somewhat of an easy transition, I would say.
And so what were the first sort of assignments you had in terms of startups? What kind of roles, and how did you get into that?
Yeah. So about 10 years ago, I worked for a smaller executive search firm that was between New York and London called Faraday Partners. And they were focused mostly on venture capital-backed startups. So we worked with companies like Thrive Market on the consumer side, which was a Series B e-commerce business at the time. We worked with Criteo, which was like advertising technology, which was really big back then. So it was a lot of different sectors within the tech space, and then really kind of hit on every function. But I specifically focused on go-to-market roles, so marketing, chief revenue officer, etc.
So obviously in a startup, the team is everything, right? It's, you're building the product, you're going to market, opening up new markets and so on and so forth. How do you think, what is the role of executive search in these? How important is it for the founders to, use executive search? And does it make a difference of course, you're probably going to say yes, but have you actually seen that it makes a huge difference in the team when they use professional advisors to acquire talent?
I think it's undervalued, honestly, because it's so important to have the right people that have the capability to build that company. And you really have such a short window of time to get those hires right. And executive search is built to really structurally find the right people for you based on what you need and what you're looking for, what works for your culture, what works for your stage, etc. And then go and use a systematic process to find the right people, assess them, and then bring them into your organization. And so it's very different from how like an internal talent function works, or if you're recruiting as a founder yourself, which is pretty much network based typically.
Yeah.
And you can get lucky and find some great people, but it's a little bit
You might know some great people, but you're not going to cover the whole market, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think, being in venture capital, you know how important it is to get those hires right. And so our job is really to go find the best people for those roles.
But some founders think that, the executive search firms are not exactly in tune with what they're looking for, or, they don't give the attention or the detail. Do you find that to be more or less accurate, or not really?
I mean, you're going to see some variation in firms out there. One of the things that we do at Faraday that's important to us and to me specifically is, it's a very structured process. We spend a lot of time, not just with the founder, sometimes with the investors and with the rest of the executive team, to really understand what's going on in the company, what's the gap in terms of like what they need this person to be able to do, what kind of person's going to be the right fit. So we sort of try to almost think like this team would, and then be able to present them in the market, represent them in the market the way that they would, and assess candidates kind of with their thinking in mind. So it really depends on the process, but if you do it properly and you spend enough time with the team and your structure and your the way that you operate, you should be able to really come to the right hire.
I think a lot of times what we see is that the founders think that it's either too costly, or they're afraid it doesn't work, and so on. But in your experience, it is positive, of course.
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty strong success rate of building really great teams that have gone on to go public. And, the proof is kind of in the pudding in terms of like how long the track records are of the candidates that we hire and what they're able to accomplish. So it's something that you can look back on and verify, right?
And the proof is the pudding, like you said. And what kind of roles have you done, or your firm has done in the last decade?
We really do across the gamut. And that's one of the things that I really like about Faraday. It's a generalist firm in the sense that we have people that can work on every different area. So we have some people who really focus more on like chief technology officers or chief product officers. I focus a little bit more on go-to-market. So again, chief revenue officer, chief marketing officer, etc. But the good thing about us is we get to really build a relationship with the founders. And once we do a strong hire with them, they'll say, actually, we hire you to do our CFO or head of people. And because we know them and we know what they're looking for, it actually really works to be able to do that. And we apply the same framework that we would to any role. So.
Right. I mean, for many years, I think here in South Europe, particularly in Portugal, you had a lot of technical talent, but not so much go-to-market talent. I think that's getting much better, with a lot of people not only coming in from other places, but also Portuguese that were in other places and living here, coming back. What are the main characteristics that you've found to be important for these go-to-market professionals?
Yeah, so one of the things that's really important is like, have they done the stage that you're looking for them to do? Have they done it before, and have they seen some success, right? So if you're an early stage founder and you are at like sub 5 million in revenue, shouldn't be hiring somebody out of Oracle or Google. You can do that, but they're not going to necessarily have the tools to be able to build what you need from scratch. And so you want someone who's like done that specific stage before, and we find they kind of break into specific buckets. So it could be 0 to 20, 20 to 100, 100 million to 500 million. And so you're looking for people who have seen success at that stage. They've successfully built the go-to-market machine and engine, which is like technology, process, metrics, and then building a really great team as well, and being able to do that to kind of get to the scale that you're looking for.
Quite often we see founders wanting to sort of maybe not hire people they know, but hire people which are less experienced just because they're less expensive, right? Or they don't have the capital. Have you seen that mistake being done often?
Yeah, it's a sort of a common trope, right? You want to save money, but reality, especially for go-to-market hires, there's a pretty heavy ROI associated with getting that role right. And so, they're heavily incentivized, right, to make their targets or beat their targets. So there are things that you can do when you bring in somebody more senior to make sure that it's more performance-based. But in reality, if you need someone who's a builder and you need someone who's a really great leader, you're taking a bit of a risk if you go too junior with that. You need somebody who has the leadership experience. And again, they've seen what great looks like. And also they've actually built it themselves before. And that's kind of the most like risk averse profile that you want to bring in, because again, you're sort of limited on time and money to be able to make a mistake. So you really want to get it right the first time. So that's why it's important to bring in someone who's like the right level of seniority and experience that we can vet to say, yes, this person's actually done this before and we feel confident they're going to be able to do that again.
You've done a lot of hiring in the US, but now you're also focusing on Europe, right? What are the main differences that you see between the two markets beyond the salary, which I think the salary ranges are a bit different nowadays?
They're different. The US is one large market. So Europe is really 6 or 7 smaller markets, right? And with those different markets, there's different cultures. There's like micro ecosystems happening in each one. And so it's really interesting trying to hire kind of within those ecosystems. And then if you do broaden it out, then there's like cultural differences. So it's just a little bit more complex in nature, trying to manage, company culture, country culture, geography, visas. So it definitely adds a level of complexity that doesn't quite exist in the US, but also it's a smaller talent pool, I would say, than the US. And so, really trying to manage expectations when you're doing like a geographic specific search to kind of figure out like, well, what is the pool of people here? And are we going to be able to find someone in this geo, or are we going to have to broaden it out?
Are you seeing a lot of Americans coming over?
I think
Like
it's
yourself?
definitely increasing. I have spoken to quite a few expats that like have done well in the US and are moving to Portugal, and they're finding different ways to plug into the ecosystem, whether it's through like angel investing or being advisors and potentially full-time roles if the right thing came up. So yeah, I definitely see that it's a trend.
So when did you arrive?
Almost exactly a year ago.
Almost
So
a year ago.
April
So what
2025.
surprised you and I mean, positively and negatively, what surprised you? Had you ever lived outside of the US?
No, it's my
No, it's your
first
first time.
time.
So you're in Europe for the first time and in Portugal specifically. So what was the aha moment?
I feel like I was pretty well prepared for moving here, but I will say, like, coming from New York, in New York, you expect everything to be like, I need this to happen today.
Right.
And I definitely had to
Chill.
learn some patience in Portugal with certain aspects of the process. But I think, it makes sense in terms of like the size of the country and how many people are coming in. And just overall, the culture is much more relaxed and calm, which I think I can, influence me to be a little bit more calm as well, which is a positive thing.
It will probably extend your lifespan a
Yeah.
little bit. At least get less stressed. And what are the other sort of good things that you found that you were not expecting?
Yeah, honestly, I find it's actually been very easy to sort of acclimate. The people are really welcoming and warm. I'm working on my Portuguese. It's actually more difficult than I anticipated knowing Spanish, but I'm working on it. But so far it's actually been like, it's
Also
very,
because everybody speaks English, right? So it's a bit of a problem.
yeah. But I think it's important if you move to a new country to
Absolutely.
sort of adopt as much of the culture as you can. So I really am trying to do that. But no, I found that the people are really warm and welcoming, and it feels very safe here and very clean. So it's been a really positive experience so far.
Now, going back to candidates, I mean, you've interviewed hundreds of people, thousands, and you've selected really high-profile candidates for big companies. I don't know if you can share some of the names of the companies that you've worked for. But what were the are there any general characteristics that you think really stand out in terms of people that do well in startups?
Yeah, I think it's being able to thrive in ambiguity, right? Like you're going to move into a company where there might not be a lot of process, there might not be a lot of structure, there might not be anything in place except for a few people, and you really need to be able to kind of roll with the punches and move with whatever you have, and then kind of build through that. One of the themes with our clients and what they're looking for culturally is like low ego, right? So especially in some go-to-market functions, you can find that having more of an ego actually helps you in that function. But really, from a cultural perspective, I think it's important to be kind of low ego, high empathy, very collaborative, strong communication skills, obviously. Um, yeah, I think those are kind of the main things.
And for the contrary, what are the things that, sort of looking back in your career, characteristics of people that could have done well, but actually ended up not adapting well into the startup culture?
I think it's people who are afraid to change, to be
Afraid to
honest.
change.
Like if you come in with this is how I do things and you move into a new company and you don't know how to adjust from that, I think that's where people can really struggle because, especially today with AI, everything's changing so quickly. You have to be able to say like, I'm not just coming in with like a set playbook that I'm going to do everywhere I go because that's not going to work in this environment, right? And so you need to be able to kind of adapt. I think it's being, especially in a startup, you don't want someone who sits in what they call like the ivory tower, which is like, well, I'm a, CRO. I don't necessarily want to get my hands dirty. Startups
Do
need
that. This is
leaders
what I
who
do.
are going to sit in on a sales call and really spend time with the team. And maybe they need to actually get involved in a deal early on and things like that. And so it's important to have people who are like willing to jump in, willing to adapt and move quickly.
It comes back to what you were saying about ranges of sales, for example. You're not going to hire someone that's too senior for
Mm-hmm.
this position. You also don't want to have people that have no seniority at all for a certain position, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of VCs, you've also worked with obviously for the startups and for the tech companies, but closer to the investors. How do you see that relationship between an advisor, the startup, and the investors?
Yeah, I think investors have obviously a literal vested interest in that company succeeding. And part of why startups, bring certain investors on or choose certain investors is because they want the pattern recognition. They want the kind of operational mindset that investors bring to say like, hey, we see that you're approaching this milestone, or we see that you don't have XYZ. We think you need this, or let us help you, or can we put you in touch with someone else who has done this? So they're, obviously they're looking to you for money, but they're also looking for you to say,
Hopefully,
hey,
yes.
we want you to be on track. And here are some things that we are identifying that can kind of help you. So actually the relationship between investors and executive recruiting firms is strong as well, because they might be the first ones. If it's a first-time founder, they've never hired executives before. A lot of times it's the investor that raises their hand and says, hey, actually, I think you need to think about hiring somebody of this level. And if you're not equipped to do that, or you don't have a team or capacity, then you should speak to these search firms and they can probably help you
Have
do
you
that.
found that it's, companies on the very early stage or very later stage that have executive recruiting, or it varies across and it really depends on the situation?
It's all of the above. I've worked with very early stage, seed stage companies that have no revenue, and I've worked with companies as big as like very large Fortune 500. So it really does kind of span the spectrum. Obviously, the reasons why they use search firms can vary. Typically, if they're a public company, they might have a talent team in place, but usually they come to us when there's like a role that they're really struggling with, or it's complex, or if it's a public company, but they're trying to transform or innovate, and that's not necessarily the network that they have. They want to bring someone in from a startup. That's typically when they'll come to somebody like Faraday and say, we'd love to work with you on this type of search.
Now, a lot of founders say, well, but I don't have a team, but I can just go on LinkedIn and do it myself. What do you think about that?
You can do that. I have seen founders do that. Again, you're kind of limited by your network there, right? And so you're looking at like, who is the best of these 20 people that I'm looking at? But
you can do a general search on you can put an advertisement on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, inbound's not necessarily always the best solution, right? Because a lot of the people that we're reaching out to, if they're doing well in their jobs, they're
not
not
going to be looking.
looking. And we have to be very persuasive to go to those people and say, hey, this is actually a better
You should
opportunity
consider
for
it.
you. And that process can take some work that a founder doesn't necessarily have the time to do. So that's again why they bring us on, is to actually go out to the market and engage the right candidates who are most likely not active.
Right. And what about the influence now of AI? Some people think that now AI will do all the recruiting for you, and maybe there's no need for human intervention. What do you think is going to happen?
So we use AI quite a bit at Faraday, not necessarily for the actual recruiting, and it can be very helpful with, research, helping us identify companies. What I found when I try to use AI to like prioritize companies, it's not quite as nuanced as we would like, especially a lot of our clients are disrupting the sector that they're in, for example, right? And so they might not necessarily want somebody who has their sector experience. They want someone who has the right stage experience, the right leadership experience. AI doesn't quite understand that. And so there's some nuance in these searches that I haven't seen AI quite be able to replicate and think the way that we would think about it. So it could get there, but I don't think today it's going to be replacing what we do.
So it's more about enhancing human capacity than really replacing.
Yeah,
At least that level. At
yes,
that level.
yes, things that because of AI, we're actually working with clients in sectors that we might not have ever worked with, like regulatory tech or industrials or defense, things like that. And so for us to kind of get up to speed, AI is really helpful. Like the amount of research you can do in a short period of time to be able to speak the same language as your client, something that would take me days before. So in that sense, it's really helpful and with a lot of the day-to-day, but it's not necessarily replacing any of the actual recruiting that we're doing in terms of like identifying the right candidates, reaching out to them, engaging with them, assessing them. Obviously, we're all still doing that human to human. So.
Mm-hmm. And so as a recruiter, what are your main recommendations for candidates? You go into you get in touch, someone gets in touch with you for a new position, and what should you
I would be open, right? I mean, you never know. Like I said, there are some of my best placements were people who were like, I'm so happy in my job. Why would I take a look at this? And then they convince them to take a coffee with a founder and they end up joining that company and the company, 10x. So you just never know. And I think it's important to be open, but I think it's also important to really know what you're looking for and be realistic about what's the right next move for you, what's realistic from a compensation standpoint, a scope standpoint, etc. And I always tell candidates, like, think about 2 jobs from now, right? What are you trying to do 2 jobs from now? And is this next step going to get you closer to that? Or is it going to take you in a different direction? Because I think sometimes people get really focused on kind of like what's in front of me today, and they lose track of like maybe what they're looking to do long term. So I think it's just really important to look at the big picture, but also, like I said, be open to new opportunities, because especially right now, things are changing so quickly. You just never know.
And in terms of interviews, there's people now that prepare interviews also with AI, and they're not so natural. In terms of, your demeanor and the way you conduct yourself in an interview, what are your main sort of recommendations for candidates?
I think just be yourself. It's, you can't really, in executive recruiting, you can't really fake it, because it's a very in-depth process and it's really meant for the both of you to assess fit. So if you're not being genuine, then it's going to be difficult for both of you to really determine, is this the right thing for me? And ultimately, it's like in your best interest to be yourself, right? Because you want to represent the best foot forward and make sure that you're both aligned. And so it really is a two-way street when it comes to these processes. Like, you should be doing due diligence on the company as much as they're doing due diligence on you. And when we get to an offer, our goal as recruiters is to make sure that you're both aligned. So we kind of close the gap. So by the time you get to an offer, you already have a POV on, is this the job that I want to take? And if the offer is strong, will I take it? Right. So just be yourself and be genuine and do your due diligence.
Wonderful. Well, Sonia, that was very insightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here at Indico.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Red Chair. See you another time. Thank you.